Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
When we are in a position of leadership, law can sometimes seem cumbersome. And as Christian leaders, we've developed our sense of autonomy and freedom and love to the point where many of us wonder, why do we need rules in the church at all? Sometimes it can be tempting to say, those in charge make the rules. And that's why the life of our Lord can be disconcerting, because he followed the law. In this final part of our examination of Aquinas' teaching on the life of our Lord, we draw valuable insights from the example of Christ for our lives as leaders today. Hey, welcome back to this last and final segment on the life of Christ in St. Thomas Aquinas. This is just such a neat experience for us because so many of us who are involved in business never take the time to think through kind of deeper questions. We're just focused on what there is to do next, the next big problem, the next mountain to climb. And by doing that, we diminish the capacity that we really have to lead effectually, because a lot of what we do depends upon our vision of the world. That's why I love doing these workshops. By doing these workshops with you, I'm able to take you through things that actually are part of your daily decision making and help you to inform yourself and your mind with the teachings of the Gospels, so that then when you go back into your daily grind, daily rhythm, you go back there charged up with the right perspective. I think a lot of times of our leadership is being kind of like a knife, right? The knife has to cut. And yet the knife will cut only if it's held at the right angle, right? We all have leadership skills, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to win the game. You can have a football team that is excellent, that has, a $20 million offensive line, and still lose to its arch rival, even if the arch rival's unranked. I mean, this can happen. And you're like, how is it that a huge, wonderful football team could actually lose to its rival when the rival's not even? And you say, well, maybe it comes down to the approach that they were taking to the game. I mean, it could come down to a lot of different things. It depends. But this is an example that this could happen over and over in our life, where you have excellent talent, excellent availability, excellent market conditions, and you still blunder. This reminds me of the story of a fellow that I knew that was running a medical device manufacturing company. And he said, the success of my company comes down to our ability to execute on our strategy. Execution is the key to success, to the point that he said, I used to tell my people, let's give our strategy, print the book out. We can give it to our competitors. We don't even have to worry about our competitors worrying about our strategy, because they could never execute to the level that we could execute. And so based upon that, he built a multi-million-dollar company and was extremely successful, because it came down to the leadership's ability in the crunch and in the grind to allow and help the people to actually effectuate what the culture of the company and the leadership model that he had going was so powerful that it actually was more important that he could execute than it was that he had a secret strategy that no one else knew. And that's why the work that we're doing at the St. John Leadership Institute is so important, because what we're doing is allowing you to go deeper, even for a brief period of time, to position that knife more accurately of your leadership, so that what you're doing every day actually gets the traction that you're looking for, actually makes the impact that you want it to make. Because we all know that in the end, it's the little things that make the biggest difference. And so let's set our mindset right? Like, let's say we are here not just as business leaders, but as business leaders who want to follow Christ. And I've said over and over again what an advantage that is. Okay, Jesus, and when you follow God, you're not putting your heart and into something that's not of value. Okay, God is not a peripheral question to human existence. On the contrary, God is the source source and the summit of all meaning, and he's the end goal of everything that we do. Aligning ourselves with God will help us to make the right decisions that are the most impactful and that will steer our company in the best of directions. So a Christian business owner should have a Christian advantage even in the business. But to do that, we got to do it like Christians. And that means we have to align our mindset with the truth of the Gospels. And that takes study, it takes us research, it takes reading some of this marvelous literature from our Christian antiquity. And one of this is, of course, the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas. And I want to look at you with you at Article 4 of question 40 of the third part of the Summa, where he specifically says, did Jesus Christ live according to the Mosaic law? And you might say, oh my gosh, this has nothing to do with leadership. And I'd say, tell that to Jesus. Okay, because if Jesus was, in fact, the archetype of all leadership, if he was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, right? Well, then everything in his life is significant. And here he's showing us that King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he lived in accordance with the law that God had given to Moses. And you say, well, what difference does that make to me? Okay, my question for you is, are you willing to live in accordance with the law of the church? Okay, because we don't live in the law of Moses anymore. The law of Moses found its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And so Christ, of course, is our rule of life, and he's the one we focus on, and he's the example that we serve. Okay, well then Christ instituted a church, and the church has enunciated 6 laws for us to live by. Are you living by them? Most of you don't even know that the church has given us 6 laws, okay? And so you say, what in the world is he talking about? I'm going to talk about those 6. I'll enunciate them for you. But my first point I want to get us to is, are you ready to live by any law when it comes to religion, period? Because there's a lot of people out there who are great people, and they love God in their heart, but they have a hard time with organized religion. And they say, actually, that can even be the antithesis of my freedom. Right? Because we made ourselves who we are by engaging our identity and our deep fire, the inner fire within, towards a difficult objective. From starting a business, to running a business, to rising up a ladder, a career chain, to getting the skills and certifications that we needed to operate at the highest level, whatever that could be. We all have mountains that we've decided to climb. That's what's made you guys great. And that's why you're here today. But when you do that, you see there's kind of an unbridledness that's part and parcel of that mindset that's gotten you to the top. Okay, this idea of no matter what it takes, right? You can even think about all the motivational videos that you've watched in your life, or the motivational speakers that you've heard. Whatever it takes, it doesn't matter. I've got to be ready to die to take that hill, And you kind of look back, and there's something that we love about that. There's a soldier who says, we're now under martial law. This is an entirely different setup, And that's the mindset that we take to our business. And it's one of the reasons that we've become successful. And I don't discredit that at all, but I'm also saying that can present a challenge to them when I say, okay, when you come into the church, genuflect on your right knee, make the sign of the cross, and go into your pew, stand with everyone else, sit with everyone else, right? And then listen to a homily that's designed to say somebody else has authority who's guiding you. You can say, oh my goodness, it can kind of grade us in the wrong direction, to the point where a lot of folks that I know kind of put that on the side. It's almost like my religion is there when emotionally I need a crutch. But when it comes to the practical things about my life, I listen to someone else. I have a business guru, not a business priest, okay? I kind of wish you'd have a business priest because you're not of the religion of the gurus, okay? So but isn't it funny how we do that? We separate the two, as if what I'm learning in the church doesn't have anything concretely to do with what I'm doing every single day. I was like, no, that's not true. And in fact, there's a challenge point here. What is the advantage that I'm going to gain by observing the laws of the church and the law that Christ lays down for me, and the participation that I have in the community of an organized religion? Is there any advantage? It can seem not. Psychologically, we can say no. On the contrary, what I need is to be the freedom to be able to drive forward, in unbridled fashion. And I'd say maybe not, because Jesus didn't do that. Even though Jesus could have, the freest man who ever lived, the greatest and most fiery leader possible, the man who himself said, I came to cast a fire upon the earth, came yoked to the law of Moses. a law that he was to consummate in his own flesh, and then in a sense, fulfill and give us in a new fashion by his law of love. And yet in a real way, he bound himself to that law. And are we to say that doesn't have anything to do with us? I say no. Actually, that's part of the Christian advantage. And that's part of what Aquinas teaches us. Can't wait to dive into this with you.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
All of us who are in leadership got here because we have an inner drive, an inner fire. And we've exerted our freedom based upon that fire towards a very high and lofty, difficult goal. And that's created a mindset, right? The eye of the tiger, right? All of us know that from Rocky Balboa, right? To have the eye of the tiger, to be the man in the arena, to stand where others have fallen, to face the headwinds, all this kind of like very romantic imagery, which is true imagery. But at the same time, that can make it hard for us to then calm down, slow down, and say, I'm going to pray a rosary every single day, right? Or I'm going to go to confession once a year. Or I'm going to learn Latin so that I can do my responses in the Mass in Latin. All these things were kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for all of that because it seems like conformism. But I want to share with you something. Listen, I've had the opportunity to visit with a lot of monasteries. I lived in Europe for many years and got to visit the home of monasticism. And I'll tell you what, if you want to talk about, on the one hand, a very intense conformism. I mean, monks are told when to rise, when to sleep. Their life follows upon the ringing of a bell. And when the bell rings, they drop what they're doing and they go to the next thing. And they live in a life that simply doesn't change. It's the same rhythm, the same thing every day, every week without change. There's no vacation, for example, amongst the monks. There's no change. You simply live that way of life. And you're told what to dress, and you're told what you can keep in your cell and what you don't. I mean, talk about ultimate conformity. And yet I've never encountered a more intense group of individuals than when you encounter monks. On the outside, they might seem kind of lackluster because their intensity isn't about the things of this world. But in terms of a personal discipline and dedication, I mean, to wake up every morning at 3:30 in the morning, every day of your life, right? To only sleep, as some groups do, only 4 hours at a time. They never sleep longer than 4 hours. They sleep 4 hours, they wake up for 2 hours of prayer, they go back to sleep for 4 more hours. That's how they spend every single night. You say, oh my goodness, are you willing to have that level of dedication? And what does that take? But you see, like, there's an example. You can, on the one hand, you say, well, in the world today, I need to be free. I need to just have no bounds to my nature so that I can therefore, become this competitive person to rise to the top. And I'd say, okay, maybe, but at the same time, that's not the ultimate form of intensity. Maybe you would be even more intense if you were more disciplined. Maybe you'd be even more intense, more free if you were bound. All right, because when I look at our Lord Jesus Christ, I don't see a man who's just going around breaking all kinds of laws. On the contrary, he obeyed the law of Moses. Well, Aquinas takes a look for us here in the Summa, and he says, what about the times when it seems like he didn't? For example, when he healed the man on the Sabbath. Okay, there was an example. He healed, as the Sabbath says, you shall not do work. He goes and heals this guy. And then he says, take up your bed and walk. Well, it was forbidden, according to the rules of that day, to carry your mat. That was seen as a form of work. And Jesus literally says to him, on the Sabbath, take up your mat and walk. So people say, look, he's breaking the rules, right? Or again, when he said literally that not everything that you eat from the outside will make you unclean, when it clearly says in Leviticus 11 that by eating or touching things, you're made unclean. Is he not teaching that basically that the law doesn't matter? Is he not freeing himself up from the law? And a lot of people will say that. You'll hear commentators kind of like making Jesus into a rebel, okay, that then was oppressed by the authority structures of his day. And Jesus was not a rebel, right? But how do we deal with that? Because there he is seemingly acting against the law or teaching against the law. Or again, when his disciples are walking through the field and they pluck the ears of grain, right, and they eat the grain out of the field, even though that was on the Sabbath and it was forbidden to do that on the Sabbath. Wasn't that breaking the law? right? And foundationally, beyond those examples, although those are good ones for your minds to ponder on, there's a more fundamental question, and that is it important for us as leaders to be bound to the rules, to laws, right? Or isn't it kind of antithetical? Does religion and its organization and the demands that it makes of us, does that crush something essential and beautiful in the human spirit? This is something that's really ingrained in our American culture because a lot of us grew up in an era where that kind of antithesis between the law and freedom, or between love and rules, it was really ingrained in us to the point that we thought, no, it's an either or mentality. And so practically we take that into our practical life. And then we say, well, I'm in church, so I'll just be ineffectual and nice and sit there, and eventually you don't. That's the whole thing. What I'm trying to say is the moment that religion stops making an impact in your practical life, you're halfway out the door. And it won't be long before you don't even go into the church at all. You stop going to Mass for the Eucharist and you start just going for custom. And before you know it, your customs change. You go on Christmas and Easter only, the CEO, Catholics, Christmas and Easter only, CEO. and then after that, you just don't even go at all. And then before you know it, you don't even believe in God. And why? Because the force and the weight of your daily concerns is so heavy when you're engaged in the secular sphere, that world will try to consume everything. There's always a to-do list. There's always a new thing to do. There's always another problem. And so if you don't find a way to anchor yourself where you say, my spirituality is what allows me to succeed in the secular sphere, right? If you can't say that, then be very careful because eventually your spirituality will be drowned out. Jesus even says this in the first Sunday's gospel of Advent in year C, when he literally says the daily anxieties of our life can cause our hearts to grow drowsy and stop living in faith. The daily anxieties. Or when he talks about the seed that falls upon the path and then thorns grow up and choke it off. And he's like, so it is in the same way that the daily concerns of our life and the busyness of our schedules can literally stop us from having the most essential aspect of who we are. And that's kind of what I'm saying here, that when our faith ought to make us more competitive, more driven, more intense, but we have to learn how to put our roots into it, right? And that's what Jesus wants us to do by showing us that in his own life, he was not here to break the law of Moses, the law of religion. He was a member of an organized religion, everybody. Not only did he found one, but he himself was a member of one, being a Jew. So what an incredible example he gives us, that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the free man, Jesus Christ, would literally himself be bound by the law of Moses. What an example. And that's an example that we can take ourselves and try to understand and live as leaders, because we are also bound. Bound by what? Bound by the teaching and the rules of Jesus Christ and of his church. So let's get into that. Let's look precisely at what that means and how that's an advantage for us as well.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
Trying to understand the value of law, and especially the law of God when it comes to us in our leadership, is not always an easy thing to do, especially when we look at Jesus in the Gospels and we see him apparently breaking the Sabbath and the Sabbath laws. I mean, it was Christ himself who said that man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And a lot of people interpret that then say, oh, well, you see, it's like we're not supposed to have all this structure around us. You can even find people who are more or less anti-Christian railing against the values of an organized religion at all, precisely on this motive, saying with organization, you've got laws and rules, and that's somehow antithetical to the religious spirit. But Obviously, it's not true because Jesus Christ is God himself. And when he was on the earth, he fulfilled and was bound to the Mosaic law. But then you say, well, how do you make sense of all these times where apparently he broke it? Well, let's look real carefully at this because, yes, I mean, he broke the man-made understanding of that Sabbath law, but foundationally, he did not break it. And here's why. You got in the first hand for when it says like when Jesus healed on the Sabbath. Well, Jesus explains that, the Sabbath law is against human work, but not against divine work. God continues to work, and so does he. So his healing is a work of divinity, and it's a good thing for human beings to do. So the Sabbath, of course, wouldn't forbid that. And the same thing goes when he says, well, if any of you had an ass or an ox and it fell into a pit, wouldn't you draw him out on the Sabbath day? Right? He's really saying that the works that help human bodies and human souls to get closer to God is something that is not forbidden on the Sabbath. So he's giving a new interpretation of the law, but he's not abrogating it. He's actually showing that the law itself is not an absolute, you see. It's a law in relationship to God and to a purpose that God has designed and deigned in the law. And he's teaching us how to read that, not as a burden that crushes us, but as something that actually liberates us. But notice, that does not mean he says there's no value in the law of Moses. No, in fact, he abides by it. But he does so by saying that law needs to be fulfilled according to the intention of the lawgiver. And Jesus, being God, has the authority to make that interpretation. We do not, but he does. And he interprets it with a much greater freedom than the scribes and the Pharisees of his day interpreted it. Same thing when it goes for the precepts of the Sabbath, because it says even the priests have to work on the Sabbath. So if they're doing work pertaining to the worship of God, well, so too can I heal on the Sabbath, because that also pertains to the praise and the worship of God. This is all what Thomas Aquinas does for us. He kind of helps us understand the narrow line here. That when Jesus taught, for example, about, it's not food from the outside that make a man unclean, but what comes from the inside. Well, he's not saying that the Mosaic ritual was wrong. He's simply saying that there's a difference between why God forbade the eating of pork, for example. And he said God forbade it because it was attached to idolatry at the time. So it's not pigs in themselves that are problems, but it's the fact that that's attached to an idolatry. So you've got to understand the difference between the nature of something and its signification, the signification that God himself gives of it, okay? So the same thing when the disciples pluck ears of grain on the Sabbath, and it's like when you're hungry, yes, you're allowed to eat even on the Sabbath. So Jesus isn't breaking the law. He's redefining our understanding of it. And that's the key, because you and I are bound by laws also. And we can say, is there any value in keeping them? Yes, there's a huge value in keeping them, because by keeping the laws of the church, the laws is like the skeleton of a body. Think of it that way. The bones form the structure and give shape to the muscles and to the flesh. If you just had muscles and flesh, it would be a heap on the ground. Because we'd have all kinds of energy, all kinds of desires. And a lot of us do. We have this drive, we have this energy, we've got this competitive advantage. We want to do things, we want to go after the high mountain. Yeah, but in and of itself, that could just be bluster. It could have as much value as the wind that blows if it doesn't have structure to it. And structure means, why am I doing this to begin with? The laws that God gives us, the laws that Jesus gives us, the laws of the Catholic Church as well, they provide kind of the necessary mooring, right, for our boat to be fastened tight and sound and safe in the storm. To say that a human being doesn't need laws and rules is like saying a boat doesn't need an anchor. Everything can be fine when you're just cruising along, but the moment the storms come, you'll be dashed to pieces, because you won't have anything bigger in your life that keeps you on this perspective. And so the Catholic Church, anyway, willingly says, the church community binds Christians by 6 laws. I'm going to give them for you, because a lot of people don't know. They're called the commandments of the church. And people say, well, where is this in the Bible? They have biblical bases, but the actual law itself, the church is like, no, we actually just made this up. I mean, it has a biblical basis, but we're going to say we have the ability as the authorities of the church to legislate on the following matters, because we know that this is important for every Christian to abide by. Number 1, confession once a year. Really important. I meet Catholics all the time. I haven't been in 5 years, 6 years. And then they say, well, I don't know what to confess, Father. And I say, well, how about that you didn't go to confession once a year? That's kind of nice, because if you can't really think of any sins, that's one right there. That's an easy one for you. Confession once a year. You say, well, my gosh, really? I'm like, yeah, that's a commandment of the church. Because by going to confession once a year, you gain this practice of humility, of saying, I need once a year to recollect myself at a minimum and say, these are the bad things that I've done in the past year, right? Communion once a year. You can't live without the bread of life. And so if you've lived a bad life, go to confession first and then go to communion at least once a year. Tithing a significant portion of your income. So important, right? The problem is not if you have money. The problem is if money has you. Yeah, but if we're not careful, having money will lead us to becoming a slave to it. And so the church says you need to tithe a significant portion of your income every year. What is that? Well, it doesn't give us any guidance. 10% seems to be a good biblical rule to go by. But in any case, that we're bound to do that. You're bound to fast and to abstain from meat on the appropriate days. In some dioceses, this is really encouraged, but in Lent anyway, it's required of all of us. Fasting from meat on Fridays or abstaining from meat on Fridays and fasting on Ash Wednesday and on Good Friday. You have to get married in the Catholic Church. That's one that's really hard when people say, I'd like to get married at the zoo. Hey, look, we respect everybody's decisions on things, and some people don't know any better, but let's leave marriages at the zoo for the things that live at the zoo. The rest of us, we go to church because our marriage is sacred unto God, and we're proclaiming that. And the church says, no, you have to get married in the church, or at least according to the permissions of the bishop, who alone has the right to make any dispensations that he deems necessary, right? You also have to go to Mass on a Sunday, every Sunday. The holy days and unholy days of obligation. It's the church's interpretation of the rules of Christ. These are what we call the 6 commandments of the church, 6 laws of the church. That's it. This is not hard stuff, you guys. And that's the 6th. Then you say, well, what does our Lord command us to do? He commands us to love Almighty God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. But that's not the only thing that he commands. He commands to love one another as he loved us. And you say, well, okay, what does that mean? That means that we have to forgive our enemies, pray for those who persecute us, and do good to those who hurt us. See, that's a commandment by Christ. Forgiveness is not an option. I could keep going, but I'm really sure that you see the perspective here. The important thing is to remember that a house without structure will be blown down by the wind. And in the same way, a religious sentiment without the discipline of law and the commandments of Christ will be lost. So we have to ascribe and understand, man, by following the law like Jesus himself did and following it in its true sense of signification, I'm stronger. And that discipline, that will give me the edge that I need to lead in all times and to lead well.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.